Hey everyone, we're back here on Techstrong TV. My next guest is Ian Livingstone. Ian is the co-founder and CEO of Keycard. Ian, welcome back. How are you?
I'm great. I'm doing awesome. I can't be more excited to talk with you today, Alan, about all things agent security and what's changing in the world with the launch of things like Mythos, Shroud of Anthropic.
You know, Ian, I've been in security 27, 28 years. I don't think it's ever been this jacked up, right? I mean, everyone I know is jacked up. They're not, and what's interesting is some people say, oh my God, it's the vulnerability apocalypse. But some people say, there's a big nothing burger. Some people say it's going to break security. Well, no, but eventually we'll all have better code as a result. We're all over the place on this one. But before we jump into all that, Ian, people on watching this, they like to know who's talking. Tell them a little bit about you and your journey.
Absolutely. So my name's Ian Livingstone, as Alan so nicely gave an introduction to. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Keycard, and so my third time founder, and started Keycard about a year ago with the idea of trying to fix one of the long-plagued issues in security that often get a lot of coverage, which was we have all these secrets, long-lived API keys, long-lived credentials sitting around on our disks. They're to deploy to places to make our software work to interconnect and operate. And we started a company to try and solve that problem. Lo and behold, of course, MCP and agents started to take off. We said, the moment we've been waiting for has arrived. Agents are here. They require something slightly different than what has come before. They're a different type of operator, a different type of user. How do we build secure software where agents are at the core of it? And how do users ensure that they can control that software? How does the builder of that software ensure they can control that software? But more importantly, how does the person that agent is operating against to also secure it, to know end to end that we trust these things? So as we've been up to a Keycard, we're helping great companies like Chime adopt agents, deploy agents, and build agents into production. And happy to talk about all those things today.
I love it. Thank you, Ian. That was very efficient.
I'm good at
it. I appreciate it. So, before we jump into the mythos and the vulnerability apocalypse and all this, let's talk a little bit about what's going on in terms of coding and agents. Here at Techstrong, we've been eating our own dog food, drinking our own champagne, whatever you want to call it. We've been on an agentic experiment for about a month now. Actually, tomorrow's a month. And it's been a hell of a ride. And we're a small company, 20 people. 22 people. We got 78 different projects where we're using agentics. A lot around our workflow, a lot around, we're redoing our websites, new marketing material. I mean, just crazy stuff up and down the company. Everything you could think of. So to us, and to me specifically, I haven't designed and deployed websites since like 1998. Okay, it's been a minute. And the world's changed a lot since then, I tell you. But in the last month, I've designed or redesigned 6 websites that I look at them and I am in awe, because beyond anything I could have ever imagined. But not only did I design these websites, I then say, hey, I want to put this on WordPress, zip it up, and let's install it. Give me the instructions. And what can you do and what do you need me to do? And I'm deploying websites. Here I am, deploying websites. Who would have guessed that? But I worry like all hell about security. Are they secure? I mean, the good news is we're on WordPress, so that there's a certain amount of built-in, right? But that being said, did I scan these sites yet? Yep. Well, no, I'm counting on my people to do this. But, we're in this, what's the word I'm looking for? Not nirvana, but, it's almost fire ready aim, right? Kind of sequence. We're just doing it because we can. Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. And is it going to come back and bite us in the butt as a result? Or is this just the new, hey, today's Monday. It's the new Monday.
So new Monday. I think it's a little bit of both, right? I think on one side, people now have realized something they never truly had before. It's kind of like the first beginnings of the internet, as you said, like you haven't built a website since 1998. Well, there's a lot of us that haven't done that in a very long time. We moved on to do different things, and now we get to go back and be builders again. And there's a whole set of people who never were, builders on computers. They're now building, right? What we have with agents is like a really, really, really fancy version of an automated paintbrush that lets us paint our creations. And ultimately, I think that's a beautiful thing. And it's an empowering thing. And literally every company I talk to is at some stage of formulation of what you just mentioned, the Techstrong TV is going through, which is how do we rethink the way we work? How do we rethink the way that we build? How do we rethink the way that we operate? Knowing that the new interface is an agent that's interpreting our intent instead of a human that's like pointing, clicking, or making decisions, right? We're basically moving to a world where we're inferring decision making to these agents on our behalf. And that is incredibly powerful. It changes the dynamics of what we can do drastically, and it changes how productive we can be as well. It's like we're moving, it's like we have electricity. Like we have an ability to farm fields we've never farmed before at a rate we never thought possible. On the flip side, we have this like non-deterministic actor, this thing that is a probability distribution that is at the crux of it. And not only do we have the velocity of creation is increasing, but also our ability to control or understand it is also decreasing, right? It's very opaque box. And so we're starting to see that in terms of the types of attacks that are going on. And in the last few weeks, we've seen some incredible supply chain attacks and some incredible vulnerabilities take hold, right? With things like Light LLM, where people or Axiom, where people were installing these packages unbeknownst to them, they're executing locally and then stealing credentials and resulting in huge breaches, right? Like the one that we saw with Mercor. That business got all of its core data, unfortunately, taken without their understanding because of the very simple supply chain attacks. And so on one side, we're at like maximum hype and maximum excitement. And on the other side, we're in like an incredible trough of disillusionment where not only do our existing controls good enough, the answer feels like no. And also we have all these new people who don't necessarily understand what's going on under the hood now using tools to create things and have broad-based access. And this is sort of like what we've in industry call it the lethal trifecta, which is you have something that is non-deterministic, so something that has agency, has access to private data, and with unconstrained controls around what it can do, and that resolves in some of these attacks that we've seen. And so I think it's both one of the most promising eras of computing. It feels like 1995 and the internet's born, and trying to figure out how you do credit card transactions, in that context. And at the same time, we have no real good answers across the board, because the way security used to work was if I validate it's a human and I trust that human, then it's reasonable for me to believe that human's going to make good decisions and do things that are the best interest of the company. And we no longer have that at the crux of our security model. And so a moment of hysteria, but also a moment of deep fear.
You're right. We're going to talk about Mythos in a second, but one of the things I wrote about Mythos over the weekend, published today, and something else I wrote last week is, call me an optimist, but I do believe that at the end of the day, when all this works its way through the snake, right, at the other side, we're going to be better for it. It's going to be good for us. But I don't want it to be a case of, the cure worked. Unfortunately, the patient died, and we got to survive the crucible that we're going to go through here to come out the other side. And I think that is going to vary by organization. Some are going to be better. Some are going to lock it down better, right? So using, when we're using, let's say, OpenClaw here, some of the folks are, we have some really, policies and rules about how it needs to be run, what it has access to, what it cannot have access to, figuring, hey, we're really trying to zero trust, isolate it, segment it, whatever you want to say. But not every organization is going to do that well. And I think what we're going to see is, dominoes are going to fall, as dominoes do. And some organizations will be more resilient, some won't. For some, it's not going to be pretty, right? It's going to be, I think it's going to be like that for the security industry as well, quite frankly. I think a lot of security companies that have made their bones and their money doing one thing are going to find themselves kind of obsolete sooner than later. So there's going to be disruption. That's what disruption does. That's what disruption is. I think people and companies need to figure out, where do they fit in this new world, right? Wondering, like, let's say Keycard, right? You got to worry about this. You're a co-founder the same way I'm, CEO founder here. How do we stay relevant? How do we stay on top of our game? How do we help our customers? How do we provide value?
Absolutely. I think this is a good question. Like, in industry, I talk to executives, I talk to head of security engineering, I talk to CISOs, I talk to like individuals on the ground, I talk to developers. Final question for everyone is, how do we navigate the tension you just brought up, right? And there's some people that are, and we kind of have two polar spectrums here, where you have people that are very against it, like philosophically or unwilling to try. And then you have people who are on the other side of the spectrum, where they're maxis. Everything has to be the new way, the new world order. And certainly what we're witnessing when we talk to our customers is, hey, we recognize that we have to become agent first, or like an agent native company, in the sense that the way we operate internally is run through agents. Humans are important. Agents are accelerants, but agents are becoming like a first class like interface to the way that we build our business. But more importantly, they think about, how do we actually evolve the product we sell, right? What we're selling to people, to be an agent first experience. So whether it's their agents, our customers' agents that are using our product, or our product becomes an agent, or whatever, we supply tools, or part of that supply chain enables business to go through this transformation. Everybody's rethinking this from the ground up across the board, because they have to, because we now have like a fundamental change in paradigm, and the paradigm shift is happening faster than anything that's happened before. It's faster than cloud. It's faster than personal. It's faster than, the mainframe. Because the productivity opportunity is also huge, and it's all happening all at once in all places. And so the tension these businesses have to navigate is, how do we enable? How do we sort through the right people to be in the business and what chairs to help us manage this transformation? And then how do we manage the risk associated with that change, right? And that's where security comes in most and foremost. Certainly, like, we know a couple of things. Agents are independent actors that are non-deterministic, that you can't trust. They're also, and that's the feature, not the bug of this revolution. And so the way we think about security has to change from one that's analysis remediatory to one that's focused on secure by design. We have to change the way that we think about building systems to assume breach. And a lot of the best practices from cloud are now must-haves, right? It was oftentimes that companies could navigate cloud security with an old posture, because the velocity of change didn't change, or the workflow didn't change, or the insertion point didn't change. Agents change all of that to the point where you actually have to think from, okay, we are going to be popped. We are going to be breached. How do we ensure that the blast radius is small? And some of the best thinkers of this are, they come from some of the largest financial institutions who had to think this way for a very, very long time. And so the shift I'm witnessing on the security is security teams who have already shifted to focusing on enablement. So how do I ensure that my end users and my developers have the best tools in their disposal and have a golden pathway that leads to the best outcomes that are secure, first and foremost? And second, how do I ensure that everything on that path is designed to be secure from the get-go, so that I'm less reliant on detecting breaches and trying to respond to breaches, and I still need that capacity because it could potentially happen. There's going to be gaps in our controls, and we need to be able to use agents to help, use agents on our side to help us discover and understand those things. But what can I build and adopt from the ground zero that lays the right foundation, the railways that ensure that we can operate safely in an agentic future?
To me, and this is all the R word, resilience.
Yeah.
Right? That's what it's about. I mentioned Mythos a few times. Of course, a lot of us talking about it a lot last week, over the weekend. New reports out from CSA with a lot of AppSec folks. This too shall pass, right? We work our way through this, but part of the answer is resilience. And things are going to happen. The vulnerabilities are there. They will be discovered. They might even be exploited. It's how we respond, right? Everybody gets knocked down. It's how you get up. And that is part of it. And I think part and parcel of that, though, it goes to the core of I think, some of the stuff that you're doing at Keycard, which is AI is writing the software. It might be damn near a majority or more of the software being written right now is written by AI or with AI's help. It is breaking down our old security our old security way of doing things. Whether we're talking about how we're testing, scanning, patching, zero trust, all these things. We need to be resilient enough to kind of roll with that, to change our past kind of patterns to match these new patterns. And those that do are going to thrive, and those that don't are not. And that's, it's a bitter, hard lesson, but it's the lesson of life. So that's where I think we are. Hey, we got to wrap up. For people who want to get more information on Keycard, Ian, where can we go?
You can find Keycard at www.keycard.ai. You can sign up for early access to our platform and contact us to help us figure out how we can help you navigate your transition and become an AI agent-ready business. We're helping developers and end users inside your company and your security team ensure that those agents are only capable of doing the things you want them to do, instead of doing the nasty thing like deleting a database or dumping a bunch of customer data out in the public information. So we're here to help you navigate through this transition. And Alan, thank you so much for the time we've had today. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. Ian Livingstone, co-founder, CEO, Keycard, here on Techstrong TV. Check him out, keycard.ai. Ian, we'll be in touch. Thank you. Come back and keep us posted, okay?
You got it. It was a pleasure, Alan. Talk to you soon.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Ryan Goins, who's head of product for Bindplane, and we're having a little chat about OpenTelemetry and the state of the community and the challenges that people are running into at the moment. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
OpenTelemetry, it's been a long time coming and a lot of progress has been made, but I think there's still work to be done. But what's your assessment right now of the overall community in terms of its maturity? And how much are we actually seeing OpenTelemetry in production environments?
Yeah, I think, it really feels like this year OpenTelemetry is kind of finally starting to have its moment. We got involved in the project back in late 2020, 2021-ish timeframe. And, I remember going to KubeCon and talking to people about OpenTelemetry, and people had never heard of it. We're constantly introducing the project, and now that's kind of all we're hearing about. So I think as far as the maturity of the project, a lot of the pieces are in a really, really great spot. It's being used in production environments by Fortune 100 companies all around the world. A lot of those that we're working with, every single day, we're helping companies deploy, hundreds of thousands of OpenTelemetry collectors in their environment. So we're seeing a lot of success with it in those environments.
I think there's hardly any observability company out there that doesn't support OpenTelemetry at this point, but there's still folks who are using more of the proprietary collectors because, well, they perceive that they're easier to deploy, even though OpenTelemetry may reduce the cost. Are there things to be done still about just making OpenTelemetry easier to install and kind of make it a little more, shall we say, pervasive?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work to do there, and frankly, that's a lot of what we're doing with Bindplane. OpenTelemetry is a massive project. Of course, it has the collector, and It's got standards for logs, metrics, traces, Gen AI. There's OpAmp for agent management. There's all of these kind of sub projects within OpenTelemetry. And so I think because of how big it is, how comprehensive it is, it makes it challenging to even just keep up with the current state. The behaviors of different components are changing all of the time. New capabilities are being introduced, and so that really becomes a full-time job. I think a lot of the proprietary agents that have existed on the market, one of the nice things about them is they're more singularly focused, maybe just like kind of strictly as, say, a log shipper, which makes configuration really simple and that much easier to manage. OpenTelemetry can do a lot more, certainly makes it more complex. And so it's something we spend a lot of time, thinking about how to improve that experience.
And the other thing I do hear from folks is on the other extreme, they're like, well, now that we finally got OpenTelemetry, they're kind of looking at it going, well, maybe this is too much of a good thing because they're pulling too much data on the other side of it. They can't store it and they can't process it all. So they're kind of now looking at it on the other extreme and going, well, no, what do I do with all this stuff? So is the way to think about this maybe a little more intelligently?
Yeah, I mean, I think that has really been one of the driving forces behind the project and why it's seen such rapid adoption over the last couple of years. Obviously the project began focused on traces. We built and donated a logging agent called Stanza, which became logging within OpenTelemetry. And of course, you get into the Fortune 100s and most of their telemetry is still logs today, and that's the huge amount of volume. So we're talking about reduction. That's largely where the problem is. But I think there were a couple of drivers. One is the vendor lock-in problem. People wanted to really control where their data could flow to make migrations easier. So as they're trying to save costs to switch to a different platform, they have the flexibility to do that without having to redeploy a new set of proprietary agents, across their 100,000 systems. So it's accelerating migrations, but also doing things like routing to lower cost storage. So you're not getting everything in your super expensive backend. And then, of course, within OpenTelemetry, there's a ton of different processing capabilities that allow you to do really sophisticated sampling and data reduction to ensure you're really getting, just the most useful data to the right place.
There is, of course, a lot of talk about all things AI these days, and I can't help but wonder if we might be able to apply AI to all this telemetry data that we're collecting, but I don't know if I can use traditional LLMs as we know them today, or are we ultimately going to need something that's a little more telemetry data specific?
Yeah, I think there's maybe two approaches that are starting to work really well. So within the collector itself, you're seeing additional processors being built with more kind of ML, like smaller ML models built in that are doing, say, like anomaly detection and real-time analysis on every event passing through the collector. And so, that's kind of more of a classical machine learning solution to the problem. Not really, utilizing the latest with Gen AI. And that's kind of hard to do in real time in the pipeline when you're talking about sending 10, 100 terabytes of data a day through it. The approach we've started to take at Bindplane is using Gen AI to build the processing capabilities. So, we're talking about the complexity of the collector, the possible ways to configure your processing so it's highly performant, it's hitting the right events and dropping the right things. I mean, it gets really, really complicated really quickly. And so what we're doing is using LLMs to basically evaluate samples of your telemetry and help you build the right processors to standardize, reduce your telemetry, and then deploy those changes down to the collector to operate on the pipeline.
How soon might we get to something that feels like, I don't know, maybe auto remediation or maybe something closer to it than we are today? Because I feel like we're collecting all the data and we should be able to analyze it and we should be able to hand it off to something that then acts on it. But, I feel like maybe that's one of those things that's easier said than done.
Yeah, I think we're going to start to see a lot of that this year. We're certainly getting closer to it on the Bindplane side. One of the pieces of OpenTelemetry that we co-developed and spent a lot of time on is something called OpAmp, which is the agent management protocol. And so that's, of course, has the collector as a client, and then there's an OpAmp server that's managing the fleet. And I think that server piece plays a critical role here because what we can start to do is have the backend platforms can communicate back to the OpAmp server. We're starting to do that via MCP, and then make changes down to the collectors. And so maybe you have an incident and you actually want to get rid of all of your sampling rules and just kind of open the floodgates for the next 30 minutes and get all of that data while you dig in. And so that's something where the observability platform can then communicate back to the OpAmp server, hey, pause all of these processing rules just for 30 minutes and give me everything. And so that kind of full circle loop, we're starting to spend a lot of time on. I think there's going to be, we're going to start to see that become a reality this year.
What happens to monitoring as we once knew it? Because it was kind of like this notion where we were going to just track a set of predefined metrics, but now we've got the metrics and we've got the logs and we've got the traces, and we use that to investigate particular issues. But does one obviate the need for the other? I mean, is essentially observability a superset of monitoring, and maybe I can start getting rid of my monitoring tools because I got to figure out how to pay for all this observability stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we, basically start to do is get kind of closer to resolution. And so, you're spending less time on getting the right data, getting it structured properly, getting the right dashboards built. And I think as long as you kind of have all of the data going into a central store, then you're going to start to, the problems are going to be recognized sooner and surfaced by, AI. And then I think the solutioning is going to start happening with AI agents as well. So, how do these things evolve? I think they basically start to merge toward, getting to resolution very quickly with a lot less effort.
So what do you see people doing today when they first get started with OpenTelemetry that just makes you shake your head a little bit and go, folks, maybe we need to think about this differently?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I really ever kind of am shaking my head. I think I have a lot of empathy as people get started with it because of the complexity. So a scenario that happens to us really, really frequently is folks are deploying OpenTelemetry on their own. They've got kind of this organizational directive maybe to transition the organization to OpenTelemetry. So they're on, the open source standard. And, they get a couple of collectors deployed and things are working nicely. Then they start to get to 100, and then they're trying to create organizational governance policies across the entire org and standards. And the complexity really starts to grow exponentially. And so I think I have a lot of empathy for users as they're trying to figure this stuff out. Because there's kind of endless different ways you can configure your pipeline and get all of these things set up. And they all have a bunch of different trade-offs and performance implications and these types of things. So the thing that happens frequently for us is somebody gets 3-6 months into kind of their migration journey to OpenTelemetry, and they're in over their head, and they'll find Bindplane actually and say, hey, can you guys help me? You know, they see that we're a huge contributor to the project and contributed, you know, the logging agent and work on agent management and those pieces. And they'll reach out. And so it's, you know, it can be a lot to wrap your head around. But, you know, I think if you kind of get your first collector deployed and get going with it, it's something you can pick up pretty quickly.
Well, what is your sense of just how open is OpenTelemetry? And I'm asking the question because part of the motivation was people were locked into various APM platforms back in the day and observability platforms. And is it easier to swap them out if I have OpenTelemetry as a kind of a standard collector, or do all these things have little extensions to them that make it hard to actually do that?
Yeah, I think it definitely should be, and it can be. And so, you know, one of the things that maybe folks are sorting through right now is, you know, within OpenTelemetry, there's a distro of the collector called Contrib. A lot of folks are deploying that in production. It just has every component, you know, under the sun included in it. And that's largely just because they're not sure which distribution of the collector they should be using. So sometimes a vendor will have their own distribution. Now, it certainly depends on the vendor, but some of these, you know, aren't really helping the lock-in problem because they can still, you know, they only include the exporters, you know, for that vendor, or maybe that vendor plus one or two others. And they're not including the exporters of their competitors. And so if you deploy all of these, sure, it's open source, it is OpenTelemetry, but you're going to need to switch out your collector if you want to switch to another vendor that supports OpenTelemetry, because they don't have that exporter included. And so, you know, even Bindplane, we have our own distribution. You know, we're actually, frankly, trying to push people toward building their own distribution of the collector. So we built an open source tool called the OTel Distro Builder that lets you do that. You pick the components you want. It manages the whole build process and has some GitHub actions and things like that that are included to make this really easy. Because we think basically, certainly if you're, you know, a larger company, you should be building your own distribution. And if you want total neutrality, you know, you're going to need to control that distribution. But there's overhead there. And so we're trying to make that really easy for folks.
So what's next for the community? What are you guys working on? Or, you know, what's at the top of the priority list?
Yeah, I mean, there is so much going on. And, you know, I would say we're kind of involved in, like, you know, just a few pieces of it. The things we're really focused on are OpAmp, which is the agent management protocol, and continuing to make that more robust and more mature. There's just a ton of new capabilities we're excited about there. OpenTelemetry has a supervisor component that we're heavily involved in, that can manage the collector itself. And so then an OpAmp server can connect to and talk to that supervisor, and then the supervisor can communicate with the collector. This is a really, really nice architecture, especially when you're deploying to IoT devices, where you just want to maintain this persistent connection, but you don't necessarily need a collector running all the time. I think those are really the two big pieces. And then I guess the third is there's in the security world, there's an open source project called OCSF, and this has become an open source standard schema for security data. And one of the things we're working on is bringing some of that into the OpenTelemetry project. So security teams increasingly can use OpenTelemetry to collect their security events and send those to their SIM.
So ultimately, how broad will OpenTelemetry be used? And I asked the question because it clearly got started out of the DevOps world for applications and infrastructure, but I'm starting to see it in not just security to your point, but I also see like the AI community is now starting to look to it as a mechanism for pulling in telemetry data. Even the networking people are at it. So, will this ultimately become kind of the cross-discipline standard?
I think it's certainly on that trajectory. Maybe it was a week or two ago, Anthropic just released some guides on using OpenTelemetry to monitor Claude code and your Anthropic APIs. So there's Google, of course, is all in on OpenTelemetry, and that includes Vertex and Gemini monitoring. And so, to your point, we're seeing just enormous adoption. Just ourselves, we're working with 18 of the Fortune 100. There's a lot of the Fortune 100 I know using OpenTelemetry that we're not working with, and so the acceleration over the last 12 months of adoption has surpassed all of my expectations. It's really nice to see the standard forming, and yeah.
All right. Well, open sources communities are by definition democratic, but if you were appointed king for a day, what's that one thing you would do?
I think this is something that you just kind of like developing any product, and it maybe happens a bit slower with an open source, but you kind of learn as things get battle tested and new and unique use cases and environments. And I think a lot of the OpenTelemetry deployments have been focused kind of on tracing. And on our side, we've seen a lot of the log deployments, and certainly at scale where we're talking, maybe 100, 200 terabytes a day, sometimes more of throughput. The thing we're spending a lot of time on right now is different components in the collector getting pressure tested at those sorts of volumes and that scale, where, there's a processor that's, not as performant as it needs to be. There's different things that, just they get pressure tested and we got to go fix. And so I think I would just try and magically get those to all be resolved. But it feels like we're getting closer and closer every day.
All right. Well, folks, you heard it here. OpenTelemetry is well on its way to being everywhere. We just have to figure out how to manage it from here. Ryan, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike.
All right. And back to you guys in the studio.
Hey everyone, I'm Alan Shimel, CEO, founder, editor-in-chief of Techstrong, and I'm here to introduce you to our newest Techstrong series done in partnership with our friends at Temporal. I think you're going to really like this one. It's the series in total is called Workflow Orchestration Evolved, Building Workflows with Durable Execution. And if you don't know what durable execution is, you've come to the right place, because that's what we're going to be talking a lot about here today, of what durable execution is and what durable execution changes. But let's start with episode 1, and let's start with introducing you to our panel today. We have 3 speakers in addition to myself. First of all, we have Tom Wheeler. Tom is the gentleman with glasses. Tom, would you maybe just give folks a little bit about your background, your position, and so forth?
Yeah, I'm principal developer advocate here at Temporal. I joined the company in 2022, and I'd spent 10 years doing technical education at another tech company, and the rest of my career as a software engineer, working in a variety of industries, but a lot of them having to do with building scalable distributed systems.
Excellent, and thank you, Tom. Next, we have Sergey Bykov. I hope if I mispronounced Sergey, I apologize. But Sergey, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, I'm principal engineer at Temporal. I joined in 2020, and the main reason I joined was I've always been passionate about helping developers build software in a better way. And this was definitely kind of step function in quality of that experience. So I wanted to help build it.
Absolutely. And thank you for joining us today. And then last but not least, we were lucky to have him. He is joining us from the road, is Maxim Fateev. Fateev Maxim is the CTO and co-founder at Temporal. Maxim, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Maybe a little bit about people always want to know about the co-founders. And
Yeah, before starting the company, I was an engineer all my life. I didn't manage a single person before that. And I worked at Amazon for 8.5 years, couple of years at Microsoft, 4 years at Google, and then before starting the company, 4 years at Uber. And so the problem and this durable execution abstraction, I kind of invented that, but it took over 15 years of iteration to get where we are right now.
another overnight success. Maxim, over the course, I've started 3 or 4 venture-backed companies myself, co-founded. I have interviewed hundreds of co-founders and founders of companies. There's always a problem at the heart of every company, right? There's a problem that needs to be solved. Oftentimes, that problem is something the co-founder themselves have experienced in their work. And they realize that it's not just them. This is a problem everyone has. This is a problem that needs to be solved. This is a problem that somehow will make the world a little better for at least some people. As a co-founder, you already said you had a problem, and it's taking you guys 15 years to really get to this point where you are today. But let's go back. Let's go back when you were an engineer and you didn't have anyone reporting to you. I'm sure you'd like to get back to that point at some point. But what was that problem at the heart of things that led to the passion of founding Temporal?
So some background, I joined Amazon in 2002, and Amazon back then was running on a big monolith. So practically you could run the whole Amazon website inside of a single developer desktop, which was kind of cool. Like imagine you could put breakpoint on practically any checkout page. But the little problem was that it was taking over 45 minutes just to relink that binary. It was an Apache module, by the way. And so it was not very sustainable model for development. And Amazon realized that, and they were one of the first companies going on the services big way. Okay, back then it wasn't called microservice, it was called service-oriented architecture. But Amazon, one of the first companies which did that. And while doing that, Amazon had to learn hard way a lot of lessons. And I kind of became tech lead at some point of Amazon messaging platform which was responsible for practically all the pops up and asynchronous communication between services. And one of the results of that was the whole platform. And you probably could experience that as a simple queue service because it runs on the engine, which I kind of helped to design and implement the first version on, like for messaging. And as a tech lead for messaging platform, and again, it all existed well before Kafka was even conceived, I was kind of point person for every design review of every new service, kind of using those technologies, and obviously also for every possible problem that you could have with them. And it became pretty clear that orchestration, what people call choreography right now, right? Like when services just publish messages, receive messages, and communicate that way, is just not right way to build large-scale distributed systems. We learned pretty well, like what people call event-driven architectures these days is just not the right abstraction. It's breaks in different levels at runtime, design time, and so on. And we kind of, as a team, realized that we need to build something else. And we did multiple iterations internally. And third iteration of that product was released as a public AWS service called Amazon Simple Workflow, SWF. And I was tech lead for that. And back then, we didn't nail it because probably most people never heard about that service, but it was kind of first step in that journey of the durable execution.
I love it. And that's such a common fact pattern, that problem that you dealt with, that you had while at Amazon led to the founding of this company 15 years later, right? Tom, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to ask you to expand on what Maxim is talking about and take it from Maxim's own personal pain, right, to the pain we see in the industry around this problem, right?
Yeah, so the problems that Maxim Software designed to solve are problems that I faced as an engineer, and I've come to see that a lot of other engineers face them themselves. And that is when an engineer goes to try to make things more resilient, more reliable by building in, for example, retry logic, doing their own state management so that they can withstand a crash or recover from a crash, doing application checkpointing. All those sorts of techniques are things that engineers and companies around the world are building for themselves, and they're doing it over and over again. So the engineer on one team builds it, engineer on the next team builds it, engineer on the next team builds it. And if you think about how much effort has gone into solving that problem again and again and again, and nobody's ever happy with the solution because it kind of works, and then you find out at 3 a.m. when you get paged that something is wrong with it. You find out there's a race condition, you find out something doesn't work properly, and then that's when you have a problem. So what do? More complexity. You do another patch, another if statement. You throw another queue, another cron job in there to try to build reliability. Well, the way you get reliability is not by adding complexity. It's by removing complexity. It's about simplicity. And that's what Temporal does. It allows you to develop an application as if you're running on a single machine, as if you're making function calls instead of remote procedure calls, so that different parts of the system can fail and you're insulated from all of that. It makes the entire system reliable, yet it makes the applications easier to develop.
Yeah. I mean, and look, in today's world where things are increasingly complicated for our machines to handle, there's still the issue of cognitive overload, right? And Sergey, if you wouldn't mind, we didn't give you a chance to talk yet, but as a developer, as a hands-on engineer, what do you talk to us about cognitive overload?
So I look at it from kind of a little bit different angle. I view it as kind of almost like maturity model, right? Like imagine if you're like a toddler developer, you build stateless application, you get the request, you make a call, something fails, I return error, I'm done. I'm not responsible. It's just their failure, right? And then as you
worked on my machine,
yeah,
we've
I got an error,
before.
return error. I'm not responsible for anything else, right? As the next step, be like, okay, I'm responsible for something. I'll do like retries. If I got 429, I can back off. I'll try to wait and kind of be clever. My state is in memory. If something crashes, it's gone. And then it's kind of like maybe a teenager developer. You get into this, I'll use queues. I'll put this request in the queue and like assume from the queue. And I build all this thing, which never scales. It always gets into the things that you don't anticipate if you naively approach it. And then somewhere down the line, and people start building this application, they arrive at the idea, I'll build my own state machine kind of management and build my kind of workflow engine. Like one of the kind of big categories of companies or developers that come to us, they build or they use some kind of homegrown, hand-built workflow system because they want to persist the state, they want to know the next step, they want to be able to retry, they're using durable timers. So all this converges as they take more and more responsibility for reliability. And eventually it is like Tom is saying, well, it's complexity that's killing us, that's reducing reliability. Can we get rid of it? Can we simplify things to be reliable because it's simple?
I love it. Maxim, if you don't mind, I want to come back to you with that. And usually there's that aha moment, that eureka moment, right? Where we say, okay, I know this is a real problem. We got to solve it. And then there's an insight. And that insight is what we build companies around. It's what we build around. Do you still remember that aha moment for you with this? And what was it?
It's interesting because if you look at Temporal and the idea of one thing we understood, we need to do orchestration versus choreography. And we started to build service around that. But being at Amazon and practically building an AWS service, we thought from the kind of backend point of view, right? So developer experience was kind of afterthought. So the scalable execution engine was the kind of core idea initially. And then initial API was practically a very raw level API, which developers had super hard time working with. And then I started to look how to kind of solve that problem. And I ended up doing something which practically everyone does who tries to build similar engine, is come up with our own DSL, right? So I kind of come up with this, we have this object which represents sequence, right? And this object represents a task. This object represents a kind of condition. This object represents a loop. And you get the idea, right? Like you kind of compose this kind of abstract syntax tree in memory. I was using Java back then. And then you kind of can specify your business logic like that, and then you run it. And it worked. And it was much, much better experience than just giving people kind of low-level APIs, which is practically implementing the whole state machine yourself. One thing I found that I didn't like that experience because it was very verbose. Is if you think about it, you can be, if you just have business logic, which is like call one function, then make a condition, right? Like if something, then call another function, else called third function, which can be like 6 lines of code. And then you convert it to this kind of abstract syntax tree syntax. And I didn't use any like external DSL. I didn't use JSON or YAML. It was just pure Java objects, which was actually more concise than probably even shorter than using any other. I found that it would translate to like dozens of lines of code, which was hard to understand, troubleshoot, right? And was very, very verbose. That was kind of bugging me for a long time. So practically, at some point, I've got the idea that can we just write code? Like code as it is, as I described, like the business logic as failure don't exist. And that it took some time to materialize. The idea is that you can just write the code, and but the problem is that you cannot snapshot the state of the code if it's blocked on something, right? You cannot call function and then, can I serialize that practically stack trace from Java, right? You cannot do that. And we wrote first version when everything was asynchronous. So practically you had this program which was fully asynchronous. An asynchronous program doesn't tie threads, so there is nothing waiting on a thread. So you could just take and serialize the whole tree of objects after every change. And I've got an intern implemented that initially, and it worked. But it was extremely slow and inefficient. So it kind of proved the concept that you can serialize it and store it, like kind of checkpoint that state. But it was absolutely inefficient. And then the aha moment was that I was looking into practically I've got a bug when this abstract syntax tree approach, which was actually called decider framework, I think, because the core component of the system was called decider, which was making decision what to do next. And it had a bug when two parallel branches were sharing some state, and that state got corrupted. And I realized that the way it was working was incorrect. Then the only way to actually fix that current state was running practically replay the whole thing end to end in exactly the same state. So that you need to practically have deterministic replay and deterministic execution to recover the state of that, even like in this abstract syntax tree. And then aha moment was to combine these two things, deterministic replay and the code, to actually make it much more efficient than just serializing the whole state every time. So practically inventing replay kind of logic. And that was the main aha moment. And the next aha moment was when at Uber we built a similar system, is to realize how to do it for synchronous code, not only for asynchronous code.
When was the first time you called it durable execution?
That was actually well into the company. We invented that term later, right? Like initially it was actually, some history there is, it was called initially flow framework. Initially it was called asynchrony. So inside of Amazon, the framework was called asynchrony, which I liked the name a lot. But then lawyers figured out that it would violate some trademark somewhere. And we kind of renamed it to flow framework. So if you look AWS simple workflow and you search for flow framework, that was the official name and still official name, I think, of that framework at Amazon. But then co-founder of Temporal, Samar, who worked with me on the flow framework, went to Microsoft and he built a durable task framework there. And now Microsoft has durable functions, which took that durable task framework and put them inside functions. So the name durable came from there. And then And ideally, one thing I wanted to call durable process. When we kind of started to that, problem is durable process already has meaning in Linux. It's like if you search durable process, you will find a bunch of like daemon type processes and a framework around that. So it wasn't very good SEO. So we kind of end up combining durable with execution, and then durable execution was borrowed.
Like everything else, marketing got involved. And here we are. Tom, I'm gonna, Maxim gave us, only the insight he can have as the founder, right? But I'm going to ask you, and Sergey, feel free to jump in here. How do you define durable execution, right? How is it, is what Maxim said? I'm sure it's not wrong, but is that how you view it, Sergey? Is that how you view it as well?
I think of durable execution as crash-proof execution, is giving you the illusion that you have a single machine and you can write an application for it and it's able to withstand crashes. If the machine goes down, it goes from being a catastrophe to a very inconsequential issue. And your application's able to recover from that with full state intact and not forget what it's done and not repeat the steps that it's already done. It picks up where it left off after it's reconstructed the state, and it continues on from there. And so I would say it's kind of like in a network operating system, packets can arrive in different orders. The operating system assembles it. So you, the developer, are unaware of these sort of problems. If there's dropped packets, they get re-requested, they get reassembled. So as a developer writing let's say a web browser, you don't have to think about how packets flow across the network or how they arrive to your machine. You're concentrating on making the request, getting the response, and doing something with it, rendering it to the screen. And so Temporal similarly elevates the way that you do development, because it takes failure from being something and crashes from being something that completely wrecks your application to something you can basically ignore. And so that's what it's all about. It brings the joy back to programming.
It brings the joy. That's a quote. Sergey, what about you? Does it bring you joy?
I try to look at it from the end goal, right? So, what do we want in the end? What's the experience we want? And as an engineer, as a developer, I want to write code that just describes what I want to happen. Right, I want to do step one, like if we take Yum brands like Taco Bell order or like Snap stories, I want to process them step by step and write just that logic. I don't want to write any boilerplate code. I don't want to write any back-off code, because that code is not joy to write. It's usually half incorrect because it's very difficult to test it, right? And the best code, the most reliable code, is the code you've never written, right? Because it doesn't have bugs. So that from that perspective, being able to just express what I want to happen, as opposed to like dealing with all this like failures. Also, don't forget time. We haven't touched on time. Like if things take minutes, hours, days, I want to just express it and say, okay, do step one, like register a new account that they requested, then sleep for a week, and then maybe send a notification to that user based on their state after a week. How do I express this logic without writing a whole bunch of machinery? That's what durable execution for me is about, is this simplicity and very clean way of expressing just what I need to happen, not all the boilerplate, all the machinery, all reliability stuff.
Tom, I asked you and Sergey to layer on top of what Maxim said, because I wanted to get the point across that in today's world, not all developers, not all of our engineers are at the same level, especially with AI and everything we're talking about. Where are we hiring junior people, newbies? Where are the newbies? If we don't hire newbies when the people like us retire, who's going to take our place, right? But something like durable execution and the concepts behind it could mean something different if you are a newcomer to engineering compared to an expert, compared to just, your average developer. But regardless of where you are in that life cycle, the problem is still there, right? The issue's still there, and the solution, you don't have to be an expert to use the durable execution and Temporal. And that, I think that's an important thing to talk about. Tom, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, so I think like the adoption of Temporal to this point has largely been by senior engineers because they recognize the problems that Temporal solves. They've had to solve them for themselves in the past, and so they've built their own mechanisms for doing that. So when they see Temporal, they immediately recognize that it's a better way of doing things, and so that's where the adoptions come from. But I think Temporal democratizes the ability to create reliable, scalable systems, and it makes it available to everybody so that you don't need a PhD in computer science. You don't need 30 years of experience doing distributed systems. You can take this software, which is open source, and then be able to build something remarkable in a very short amount of time because it makes you productive. So the benefit to senior developers is obvious, but the ability for a junior developer to do the sort of things that would have previously taken a senior developer, it's there. And I think if you're a junior developer and you're looking for a way to set yourself apart, absolutely look at Temporal because that's giving you a superpower. Instead of spending your time doing this undifferentiated work of building the reliability that I was talking about, people in every company have to sort of build for themselves in a world where Temporal didn't exist. Well, now you have a head start. You have a foundation you can build on, and you can then spend your time developing the parts of the application that customers actually care about. And that's going to set you apart from the competition. So while the other people are still debugging stuff, you're going to be out there shipping things. You're going to be working on the second version. You're going to be scooping up customers and getting market share. You're going to be setting yourself apart. And I think Temporal sets developers of all skill levels up for success.
Sergey, so I think we've defined it. We defined the problem. We defined, here's the solution. But let's talk a little bit about how it works in practice, right? Let's get real now. And guys, I don't need to ask Tom, what do you think? Maxim, what do you think? Feel free to jump in. But let's have a group discussion. How does this really work in practice? Right, let's make it tangible.
One thing I would just want to make sure that people, because we talk about like durable execution, and all three of us know very well what it is, but I think people still can be confused what it provides as a developer. Just think about it, like imagine use case when you want to do customer subscription, right? You want to do, and let's say you need to charge them 12 times during the year, once a month, right? And then send them notification. And try to design that in your head. How would you design a system which just once a month charges credit card, then sends email, right? And then repeats that. And then you want to do it for let's say 100 million users. And it's a pretty interesting probably exercise for a coding interview to try to design such a system, and then start thinking about failure modes. What happens if credit card doesn't pass? What happens if provider is down? What happens if all sort of other system can be email is not answering and so on. And in Temporal, practically, if you use durable execution, what you would do, you would just write practically normal code. You would say for loop 12 times, sleep 30 days, really calculate probably sleep interval for every to end up in the end of the month, and then charge and send email. And you write such a loop once. And this is the code you would write. This is kind of most of it, because durable execution will guarantee that in presence of any failure or any crash, this code will be resurrected, all state will be preserved, and will continue running, right? And then any API call, for example, if you send, say, charge card and system is down, it will be behind the scenes retried as many times as necessary, even for days. And then your code will unblock the moment it goes through. So it just think about just how much code and effort you saved. And this is also scales to any number. So you can have billions of those running parallel. So it's absolutely practical to have one of those functions running per customer, even if you are somebody like Facebook. Right. So you can run practically at any scale. And it's given you practically out of the box. That is kind of the basic idea. And then obviously we can talk a lot about how it works behind the scenes. But I think that people kind of just say, I just write normal code and I don't think about any other things. And this durability of this code is provided by the underlying system.
Max, I remember when it was AWS first came out, right? One of the taglines was something like, run your business on Amazon, right? Use You want the same infrastructure, the same kind of experience that Amazon gives their customers. We offer it to you here with AWS. Of course, not everyone really needed that level of scalability. But, and now as a CTO co-founder, you know, if you're selling to enterprises, even if they don't need that level, they think they do, or they want to be able to scale to that. But you also have customers who realize they're not a jumbo. They're not, 100,000 employee or however you want to measure size. But they still need durable. They still need stable. They still need scalable. Sergey, I wanted to give you a chance to participate a little bit more here.
I would add to your list reliable, right? Because no matter how many the customers you have some business processes happening, like processing orders or requests, provisioning infrastructure. Like it doesn't matter if it's 100 or 100,000, right? You still, if 99 out of 100 succeeds and one is stuck, you want to know what, you want to react, you want to figure out what's going on. And so kind of do a durable execution allows it, not only you write just kind of intent code, here's what I want to happen, right? But you also get visibility into what exactly each of this execution is currently at, right? Is it waiting on some service? Is it getting error from some dependency? So it empowers you with this kind of visibility into what used to be hidden within the running process. You have a running process and it spits out logs, and then you can use grep, you can use tail, trying to figure out what's going on in production. In this case, you have visibility. I have 1,000 customers and I have these orders, 10,000 orders being processed. I can see that 10 of them failed or are failing. Right? So that's the superpower you get right away without writing any code for that.
Fair.
So let me add one more thing. So one thing that people don't think is even possible until they learn about durable execution is patching live code. And this is very absolutely real case where you run your business process, needs to call API of some dependency, shipping or a payment processing. And on the other end, they changed their API. Now what was optional parameter became required, or they enforce some form. Your calls are failing that was succeeding just yesterday. What do? In this case, you can see in this visibility that this is the error code that you're missing the required parameter. But you can go and change your code of your application, deploy this new version, and it will continue from this step. Now this call will start succeeding and your business processes, your orders will complete, the process will complete. That's another example people cannot even think of until they see it.
So guys, I was out in San Francisco last week for the RSA security conference. It was all about agentic AI, everything agentic. Maxim, when you first started at Amazon in 2002, I don't know if you were thinking about AI and agentic AI and, all of the things but we find ourselves in such a interesting place. It's exciting and scary at the same time, right? There's disruption happening, there's change happening, but there's also opportunity happening. And increasingly, engineering teams, software teams, security teams are being told what you used to do isn't going to work, doesn't work going forward. We need you to adopt new ways of doing it. We need you to go faster. We need you to go deeper. You got to do it differently. Maxim, I'm going to ask you to kick it off, but then Tom and Sergey, please jump in. What happens now if you want to keep it? Can we keep doing it the old way in light of the world we're living in? And how does durable execution help us in this brave new world that we find out, especially a lot of developers out there? We're all, mind-boggling in so many ways.
I think from one point of view, AI and the LLMs, they changed everything. At the same time, they actually increased, they just made existing problems worse, right? So if you think about it, a lot of like development last 25, 30 years was about increasing number of moving parts, right? Because we have desktop applications, then we started to do multi-tier applications, then we added containers, right? Then we added like sandboxes, like lambdas, and now we added agents. And if you think about it, where we had like 3 parts in the application or 5 parts, now we can have millions. And we are still in this kind of baby era of like MS-DOS or for agents, because most commonly used agents and most popular agents are still running on a single machine in a practically single process. And but we clearly see that they become much more long running. They becoming smarter, which means that we'll do more work and communicate to each other, communicate to external systems, and we get a lot of moving parts. And practically, your systems become more and more distributed. And this is exactly what kind of durable execution and Temporal solve, is that we solve problem of scaling and running reliably large distributed systems. So practically, from our point of view, is just Temporal's perfect fit to solve this problem of any agentic system, which cannot lose state and fail in the middle. And especially right now, the system actually not only read information, but they also change the world. And you don't want to end up in a situation when you change half of the world and the other part is just dropped, right? So you want to make sure that, and also there is just tokens thing. You do something like deep research, you do like 40 minutes of LLM calls, and then like on the last minute something crashes. You don't want to lose all this progress. It's just expensive. So this is also other problem which you solve out of the box using something like Temporal, and durable execution just makes it trivial to implement that. And so that is kind of one part, is like running the systems. And another part is generated code. LLMs are pretty good translating your business requirements to code, which corresponds to those business requirements. But the moment you say, okay, it's fine that you can call these 5 APIs to achieve the goal, but now make it fault tolerant, durable, and make sure that this scales to million parallel items, LLM will not have been able to do that without a lot of guidance. With durable execution, you can practically separate all the complexity and outsource all the complexity to durable execution, and then make LLM generate simple business level logic, and you get the best of the both worlds.
Excellent.
Yeah. To expand on that, I think AI changes the economics of software development, and it means that we're going to have a lot more software in this world because it's less expensive to develop. And so things that weren't feasible to create before suddenly become possible. You're no longer constrained by the difficulty and the commitment of creating software, but it doesn't change anything about the need for reliability. I mean, ultimately, this software has to work. It has to deliver results. It has to deliver value. And so is what Maxim said. If you have an agent that's taking, let's say, 100 steps to achieve some result, and you get 99 of them right, and it fails on the last one, then you failed. You haven't delivered the value. There's no partial credit here. Nobody's going to pat you on the back for the 99 that you got right. It's the one that failed in the end that wrecked the entire thing. It's wasted tokens. It's wasted opportunity. And so you need reliability more than ever before, because ultimately, even if there's agents in the loop doing things, there's a human on the other side that's waiting for these results. And they require that the thing has to work. You've got to make it a production. You've got to deliver results. You've got to deliver value. And that's what Temporal helps companies do.
I think it's...
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
So there's interesting, maybe a way of looking at that. The more things change, the more they kind of stay the same, just at a different level. Like, one of the reasons it was easy for me to join Temporal, because before that I spent like over a decade working on actors, right? And just isolated things, they hide a state, they exchange messages. And if you think of agents, they're kind of like actors, like they're addressable, they have their stable identities, they hide their state, they send messages to other agents to help them. What they're missing, if you just do it the old way, they're missing the statement durability, like reliability of the execution. And so if you combine these old concepts from the 70s with some new ways of doing like managing state, you get to this new kind of paradigm, even though it's a kind of combination of all like previously discovered tricks how to build software. And that builds a kind of programming model, which programming model is how you think, how you model a solution for a problem in your head, right? Like, how do I visualize in my head what I need to build here? And the simplicity helps with that, with just kind of mapping these agents into something that easy to explain, easy to think about.
So guys, we need to wrap up, but Tom, you said something that is such a term of the times: wasted tokens. Wasted tokens, right? I reminded of the movie The Bronx Tale, where the father says to the son, the worst thing in life is wasted potential. Well, the worst thing in our time right now is wasted tokens, right? Because no one wants to waste tokens on AI that we're not making forward. But guys, we need to wrap up here. We try to keep these at a reasonable length for people to listen to in one sitting. I think we understand now what we mean by durable execution. We understand how it applies in today's world as much or as more even than when Maxim was working on it on this problem, solving this problem in Amazon all those years ago. Let's talk about going forward a little bit, right? First of all, durable execution is not a tool. It's more of almost a mindset shift, right? It's a way of looking at how we're going to do things. It's also an emerging standard. Teams should start exploring it, even if they're not going to use, temporal durable execution today. It's because this is a question of not if it becomes the standard. It's a question of how soon are you going to start solving this problem? Because we all have that problem. And this is exactly the kind of things we're going to delve into now going forward. Episode 1 here is very much a foundational episode. We laid out a lot of foundation. I'm really excited to see where it goes from here. Maxim, I don't know if you'll be joining us on every episode, but I certainly hope so. I realize you're busy. Tom and Sergey, thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching this. By the way, go check out Temporal. Do a Google search, if you still do Google search, or ask your AI about durable execution and see what it says. We'll be back probably in the next 2 weeks with our next episode. So stay tuned for that. You can watch it here on Techstrong TV, the Techstrong OTT channel, or all your favorite, wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, etc. It'll be up there. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. Hey everyone, it's Alan Shimel, founder, CEO here at Techstrong, and welcome to our continuing series on AI, agentic AI, the future, here with the Microsoft team and our Futurum analyst team, as well as Techstrong. In this next episode, though, we're going to be joined by Mitch Ashley of Futurum, who leads the software development lifecycle and building segment at Futurum. And Mitchell is talking with Brian Good, whose official titles is Corporate Vice President and Agents Marketing. But Brian is really here talking about agent apps and chat. And it's obviously a very hot topic as we move to an agentic AI workflow-based basis. So let's join Mitchell and Brian here with me, and it's great to have them both.
My name is Mitch Ashley, and I'm VP and Practice Lead of the Software Lifecycle Engineering Practice at Futurum Research.
And Mitch, my name is Brian Good. I lead the Business Applications and Agents team here at Microsoft.
Let's start here. 2025 is described as kind of an inflection point for AI adoption. What do you think are the most significant changes that you've seen in organizations as they're using AI and agents in their businesses this year?
Well, I absolutely agree. 2025 is really an inflection point, and we'll sometimes describe it as the year that the frontier firm was born. And you might have heard us talk about the frontier firm before. It's this idea of companies that are putting AI really at the heart of their business, and it's enabling them to do things like reinvent the way they engage with customers or transform their business processes inside their company, and beyond. And it's really the year these frontier firms are sort of rising up, and a time when I think we can learn a lot from these early adopters and understanding how they're deploying AI, how they're being successful, and then figure out how we can take those insights and bring them to our own businesses. That's where you can have outsized impact.
As AI transforms those functions, what do you see as the new patterns of work that's enabled by Copilot and agents as customers start leveraging the technology for productivity or innovation?
I'll tell you what, I have studied these frontier firms as they come up, and there's really three patterns that I see across these frontier firms. The first is really enabling employee productivity. So they give every employee an AI assistant like Microsoft 365 Copilot, and it helps those employees be more productive. The second pattern that I see is really these frontier firms deploying AI to automate existing business processes. So, for example, they already have a way of handling expense reports, but they can use AI to speed that up and reduce costs. And that certainly results in some benefits to the customer. The third pattern is really where a customer like starts from the beginning, let's say from first principles, and they reimagine a function altogether. They'll reimagine what it means to engage with a customer who has an issue with their product, and they'll put agents at the heart of that. Most companies can only take on one or two of these functional transformation projects at any given time because it's a big lift. Again, it's reimagining a function from first principles. It's not just taking existing processes and applying AI to them.
How far along do you think most organizations are in their adoption cycle for generative AI?
Well, I think we're still in early innings. There's no doubt about that. Customers are starting to deploy AI in different functions, as we talked about, but certainly they haven't, in most cases, fully realized kind of the transformation that AI can have across their organization. So it's still very early innings. But I'd say we see very promising signs and green shoots of that adoption and success. Again, the key really here is to start function by function. Think about a particular function. Think about peeling it back to the business processes you need to go focus on. That's where you can have outsized impact.
How do you define agentic business applications and why are they critical for organizations?
Yeah. Well, I do have a vision that there's the application of old is really transformed with AI. And we call that new type of application the agentic business application. And the agentic biz app includes the assistant for the human to start to use. It includes pre-built business process agents that basically take the drudgery out of work. And then it's built on a data foundation. And so instead of being limited just to the data that, maybe is in the CRM system or the ERP system, it joins that with data from other lines of business systems and even productivity data so that you have a rich set of data that you can build agents on top of, and you can empower your humans to get better decisions from. And so this idea that brings all those together, the assistant, the agent, the application, I call the agentic biz app, and I think it's a really big idea.
Let's talk about why you're optimistic about the future of agentic business applications.
I have a lot of optimism here because number one, I see customers already deploying these applications and really transforming their business. So I already see people starting to get great benefit from it. But at a more human level, the thing that gets me excited is like if you think about every one of our jobs, like there's a lot of stuff that we end up having to do that really isn't adding joy to our lives. Me doing an expense report or, filling out a CRM system, with an update from a customer call. Those aren't the things that that make us unique. Those aren't the things that bring joy. Those aren't really even things that add business value collectively. But if we can delegate those things to AI and agents, I think we'll enable ourselves to actually go do far bigger things and really take our ambition to the next level. And so I am absolutely excited for what the future holds.
I'd love to hear about how you see the role of AI agents evolving just over the next few years, especially as organizations start to redesign core business processes, drive outcomes for efficiency. How do you see this taking shape?
Yeah, great question. I would say that we really believe there's a spectrum of agents. There will be very simple agents that someone will use that might just be grounded on a particular knowledge source and help you, understand, what might happen from that knowledge source. Then there'll be task-based agents, and then there'll also be more sophisticated, fully autonomous agents as well. And this more autonomous agents is where you can unlock a lot of business value. These are agents that aren't called by a human. They're just running independently. They're triggered based on different actions, and they can really automate business processes, in some cases from start to finish. So we believe there's this spectrum of agents. And today, I'd say most agentic use cases start with those more simple kind of knowledge agents. But increasingly, we're seeing customers bring in these task-based agents and autonomous agents to automate things end to end.
How about the C-suite leaders? How should they be thinking about investing in agentic technologies for long-term value?
Well, every C-suite leader I talk to today is already in on AI. Like every one of them recognizes that it's a competitive advantage if they can move quickly. And if they don't move quickly, they recognize it could be a disruptive force in their industry. But let's face it, AI, it's transforming businesses, it's transforming functions, it's going to reshape entire industries. And every C-suite leader I talk to recognizes that and wants on board. What they're looking for, though, is a partner. They're looking for the tech, of course. They want to make sure they've got the right tech, but they're also looking for a partner to help them shape this in their business. And that's where Microsoft, I think, comes into play. We're not a large-scale model maker, but we do take the best of the models and bring them into the workplace so that companies can use them.
We're talking about AI being a disruptive technology, probably because it seems that it really can and will affect every part of our work, our lives, et cetera. Certainly is affecting how we create software with new concepts like agents and agentic AI. Curious about your thoughts. Share with us, how does Microsoft view what the transformation is going to be like with AI really having an impact and a big benefit to businesses?
Yeah, many industry pundits will say that this move to AI agents is going to lead to the rise of more consumption-like models or outcome-based pricing. And I think they're right. That's definitely a direction that I see the world shifting as well. The only thing I would balance that with is that many customers are still most comfortable buying things on a per user or per seat basis. And so the approach I'm taking is, how do I enable customers to buy offerings that they're comfortable with? And that's typically like a per user or some type of per tenant type of license, while giving them the flexibility to grow and shift into more consumption models as their business changes. And so we are at an inflection point, just as we said. And I think one of the things that will change is the business model over time.
Talk some more about agentic, when you think about agents operating on their own or more autonomously, and why is that an important thing that organizations are looking to move to?
Yeah, it really comes down to business priorities. Like every business leader I talk to wants to find ways to grow their top line revenue, or they're looking for ways to automate things that they're doing so that they can save money or redirect folks to focus on more important activities. And, autonomous agents really fit that bill. Imagine in the sales context, you can have an autonomous agent, going through marketing leads and qualifying them before handing them off to a human seller. That's work that wouldn't have gotten done in the past or would have been done by a human seller. and have been relatively low value, not something they really enjoyed about their job. And so an AI agent can do that and add great value to the company, and again, help that company grow on the top line.
Talk about Microsoft and the offering that you have in the context of an end-to-end toolkit, if you will,
Yeah.
for functional transformation.
As far as the toolkit goes, we really believe that there's three essential parts to it. The first is we think every employee should have an AI assistant. In our case, that's Microsoft 365 Copilot. Think of that as a productivity tool to help every employee get through their workday and get more done. It can be quite transformative. That next step up is where agents come into the picture. And I describe agents as really being for every business process or workflow in an organization. And we have a toolkit that enables customers to build their own agents. It starts with Copilot Studio, but even extends into our Azure capabilities with our Azure AI Foundry product. So agents pair very nicely with that Copilot that I described first. And then the final step is where the system of record becomes the system of action. And we'll sometimes call this the agentic business application, where you take a CRM system and you add agents and an assistant to it to really transform. Those three are the essential ingredients or building blocks for AI transformation in a frontier firm or any business at this point.
That's a great term. Can you share some examples of how Microsoft customers are already seeing measurable impact from adopting agentic business applications?
Yeah. One example I think I can give is Lifetime. They're a great customer of ours based here in the United States. They've used us as part of their finance and supply chain operations, and they've deployed agents to basically speed up how they handle and process e-commerce orders. In fact, I think it's saved them 95% in terms of their e-commerce order efficiency by deploying AI agents and agentic business applications to solve that problem. So I think that's a great example. We also have another great example from Europe, a large utility named Eneco, who deployed a multi-language AI agent for their customers to help them scale and address customer questions. It's a pretty cool solution, saves them time, and again, helps them scale up. Now, it's a really exciting time in the world of agents.
You talked about the C-suite and the kind of the three phases in this adoption curve as we adopt AI. What kind of recommendations do you have of like how to get started? Well, maybe near some of the near-term activities.
Well, as I said earlier, I think AI is going to transform every company, every function, every industry, and that opportunity is so vast. Sometimes it's hard to know where to get started. And I've got two bits of advice really there to anybody that is pondering that question. The first thing is, again, start with a function. Pick a function that you want to go after and then peel it like an onion. Go look at the next layer. Which are the business processes in that function that you can apply a copilot or agents to really transform. The other thing, though, is don't get into analysis paralysis. Just pick a business process. Just go pick a business process to get started with. And as you learn from applying AI to that business process, whatever it is, whatever your thorniest business process is, go apply AI to it. You are going to learn. Your organization's going to learn. Your culture will adapt. And then it will flow from there. So the opportunity is so vast. Don't let that keep you from getting started. You got to get started, start simple, pick one thing, and go from there.
So as we move to an agentic business environment, let's talk about the people. How do you see the role of human creativity, judgment, leadership? How is that going to evolve?
Yeah, well, that's an excellent question. And one of the things that we'll often talk about is how AI and frontier firms is going to transform the way we work. It's going to change the org chart into more of a work chart. We sometimes talk about frontier firms taking on the Hollywood model, where individuals will swarm around a problem, like focus on a problem, and then disband. Once they've got a solution. And so it's absolutely going to change the way we work with others inside the workplace. It also, I think, is going to give rise to a new idea that we call an agent boss. And you can imagine, just as a people manager today might take work and delegate it to different humans on their team, resolve conflicts and sort of manage performance. Every one of us in the future is going to do that, but not just with humans, but also with agents. So imagine taking a business problem, breaking it up into pieces, delegating it to agents or agents on your team, resolving conflicts that might come up, applying human judgment. It's going to be an absolutely transformational moment. And I'm really excited about it. I really believe that, there is still a huge opportunity for humans with human ambition to go do great work, amplified by AI.
Talk a little bit about how you see the difference in the working together between applications, assistants, agents, the different technologies.
Well, that's an excellent question. And we really have this complete toolkit that spans everything from the assistant to the agent to the application. And I think those three things work together in a symbiotic way. As an example, you can imagine that I might go to my assistant and, ask a simple question, my AI assistant like Microsoft 365 Copilot, and ask a question about, summarize the emails or help me respond to the emails I've got. Or I might use an agent to update a CRM record after I meet with a customer. But I'm still going to want to go to an application, really, that's a purpose-built experience for me if I want a more specialized or fine-tuned experience. So those three things really work together.
Talk a little bit about the industries or maybe the business functions that you expect to see reshaped first by agentic AI transformation.
Yeah, there are three or four, I'd say, functions in particular that are, I'd say, ground zero for functional transformation with AI and agents. Certainly, customer service and customer experience is one that is absolutely being reshaped, and say a very early adopter of AI, no doubt about it. Another where I'm seeing a lot of early AI adoption is in sales. And it's just because, just as we talked about, there's a big opportunity to use AI to basically increase capacity for that organization to grow top line revenue. So the business impact there is undeniable. But I also see it in places like finance and supply chain, where you can use AI to shorten the time it takes from an order to actually being able to ship it that order. We're seeing people use AI to improve accounts payable and accounts receivable. So we're seeing some pretty interesting impacts there.
Let's talk a little bit more about the frontier firms. They're not just adopting technology, they're also changing the way they're doing business around AI agents and Copilot capabilities. You talk about what they're doing to invest and support the short-term ROI that they're looking to get for long-term innovation.
The most successful frontier firms are doing actually is taking a functional approach. And so certainly they'll think about their entire company, but they'll really take an approach that's function by function. They'll think about their sales function as an example, and then they'll peel back the onion a little bit and understand which processes inside their sales department they can automate using AI agents as an example. They'll look at which things their salespeople need help with, where you could pair up an assistant like Copilot to help them throughout their workday. And they'll even look at how they can bring agents in to really augment business capacity, maybe to grow top line revenue or take out costs. But starting function by function has really been the recipe that these frontier firms are using to see success. As an example, in our sales organization, by deploying Copilot and agents, we've been able to improve revenue per seller, in some cases by almost 10% in some organizations. And if you think about that, giving a seller 10% more capacity is like giving them an additional month in a year without actually having them spend any extra hours through the work week. And so there's some pretty remarkable results. That's just sales. We've been able to do the same in customer service, in our finance department, in our IT department. Our legal team has been able to reduce costs by 5%. By deploying AI and agents within their functions.
How do we ensure trust and transparency as agentic systems become more and more autonomous?
Yeah. Well, there's two things that we want to do to help with trust and transparency. The first is we have a rigorous set of principles on responsible AI. So for any AI that Microsoft deploys, we adhere to an important set of guidelines, and that's really table stakes. So that's the first piece, responsible AI and our focus there. The second thing that I think is important is we now have an opportunity to start to quantify the value and the impact that many agents will have. And we often will call that in the industry, we'll call that evals or benchmarks. And increasingly, I think we have an opportunity to help our customers understand how agents are being effective in their workplace using these evals and benchmarks on real world problems. So for example, a typical workflow will be a sales leader doing sales research to try to understand like how they might want to organize accounts or territories or, reshape planning as they think about the year ahead. We recently released a new benchmark that we call the Sales Research Bench, and it shows how agents can actually help sales leaders in that very specific job, and it's quantified. And so I think you'll start to see more of that. And between following responsible AI standards and then using quantitative measures like evals and benchmarks to understand efficacy, I think we're really on the cusp of helping customers know how they can deploy AI in a safe way for real business results.
Well, thank you, Brian, for sharing with us your insights and kind of look into the future. What's happening with agentic business applications?
Thank you very much.
It's really amazing the pace at which AI has been adopted and continues to evolve. The technology evolves on a near daily basis. But at the same time, organizations have to figure out how they're going to implement their AI strategies and what the business outcomes that they're most important to their business. I think it's very fascinating how Microsoft has approached the market, both from the standpoint of addressing the individual and their productivity, but also thinking about new workflows, new models of business, but doing that with not a set of tools, but a set of capabilities that provide integration with data, process, workflow, and agentic AI. No one knows for sure what the future holds and what an agentic business might really, really look like. But in situations like today, when we remove constraints of what we can do with technology thanks to AI, that's where the possibilities are created. Using tools like Copilot, using applications like Dynamics 365, and we'll see what end users as well as technologists bring to bear in their ideas and how they reshape businesses for today and tomorrow. I don't know about you, but I'm super excited about the future that we're creating together, thanks to working with technology companies and with end users like yourself.
Welcome to Reality Check. I'm Dave Nicholson, and I've got a very special guest lined up that we're going to be talking to in a moment on the subject of revenue recognition and revenue life cycle. What does that mean? You probably are aware of this idea that entities generate revenue, and you've got sales organizations and all sorts of people involved in that. You've got marketing involved in it. But what about something like healthcare, where they're not out selling products the same way a car dealership is? Massive amounts of money coming through the operation that has to be tracked. But I'm getting a little bit beyond even my full understanding of this. I want to introduce Christine Ackerman. Christine is a person who is in charge of revenue lifecycle, revenue recognition at a very large healthcare organization. Christine, welcome.
Hi, Dave. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. It's good to see you. So help us understand, what does this mean? What is revenue recognition? What is revenue life cycle? Am I even using the right terms?
Yeah, you're really close. So, in the healthcare industry, when we think of revenue leaders or chief revenue officers, vice presidents of revenue cycle, etc., they lead the revenue cycle. So, when you think of a revenue leader in the healthcare space, they're not in business development. They're not looking typically to grow volume in some way or to grow sales, but rather to manage this revenue cycle. And the best way that I can describe it in the most general terms is you think of pre-care, care, and post-care. And the revenue cycle functions, for the most part, represent scheduling, registration, insurance verification, prior authorization procurement. That's all pre-care. Then you have clinical documentation, charge capture, coding. Typically that occurs at time of service or maybe shortly thereafter. Then you have the back end of the revenue cycle or the tail end of the revenue cycle, and that's when you get into billing, collections, payment posting, denial management. And then even after that, you get to patient billing and collections, write-offs, etc. So there's a continuum to revenue cycle. It's kind of like a production line, I guess, if you want to think of it that way. And it sounds simple enough, but it's not. It's ridiculously complex. And the reason, for the most part, that it is ridiculously complex is our payer systems over time have evolved into layers and layers of non-standard rules that are constantly changing. Okay. And when I refer to pairs, I guess just to ground us
Yeah.
in definitions here. So you want to think of pairs in three broad categories. So you have your government pairs, that's going to be your traditional Medicare and Medicaid. Then you have your commercial pairs, which are like our large health insurance companies like United Healthcare, Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Cigna, Aetna, etc. And then you have self-pay. So that's your third category. And in that self-pay category, you would break it down into three subcategories. So you have pure self-pay, meaning you may be a patient that has no health coverage at all, which is very rare now with the Affordable Care Act, but it is possible. And that's pure self-pay. Then you get into patients who may have coverage, some type of healthcare coverage, but the service that they're seeking isn't covered at the health system or provider they're seeking care. So in those instances, for them to receive care in those institutions, they may have to pay out of pocket and would be considered pure self-pay. And then the third subcategory within the self-pay bucket would be balance after insurance, which is what most patients would fall into. So that means you have some type of health coverage, but that health coverage includes a deductible, a co-insurance, a copay, and your bill won't come until after that healthcare provider has worked through the entire billing and collection cycle with the insurance carrier, which when you're talking about really complex care, that may have included a denial of some kind, there's usually this ping pong match that occurs between a healthcare provider and a payer that could go on, up to a year, which then becomes a patient's dissatisfier, right? Because you're not getting a bill and you receive your services 6 months, 8 months, a year ago. So you want to minimize that as much as possible. But I'm just trying to describe in the most general terms I can think of what the cycle looks like and why it's complex.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. And I can imagine with even a moderately sized hospital or hospital system, healthcare system, you very quickly start getting into the tens and hundreds of millions of dollars a year and even billions of dollars a year in some of these cases. So the distance between billing and getting paid can be a pretty big deal. And even if you don't look at it from a profitability perspective, but from a services delivery perspective, right? Because if you're essentially waiting an extra month to get paid, there's a very real cost associated with that. Those are dollars that you can't dedicate towards additional patient care, expansion of facilities, and things like that. Am I on the right track? How do you measure that? How do you measure how well you're doing today in managing that cycle?
Yeah, you are spot on, Dave. And yes, your ability to convert a claim to cash is a really big deal as quickly as possible. So when you think of industry benchmarks and what most revenue cycle leaders are measuring their performance against, it's AR days. So how many days do you have sitting in AR at any point in time? You have AR greater than 90. Those are two biggies. And then, and I would call them lagging indicators. And then you have a leading indicator, which would be your primary initial denials. Because if you have, and you're measuring in percentages, if your primary initial denials are really high, obviously it is going to take you longer to work through the appeal and, the adjudication process than if your initial primary denials are low. So from an industry best practice perspective, and this varies a little bit over time, but for the most part, you want to keep your AR days at 46 days or less. Like the higher performing health systems are hovering in that 46 days in AR range, and your AR greater than 90, you're going to want to keep it at around 23% or lower. And then your primary initial denials, like really high performing health systems who have great workflows, they've adopted more advanced tech. They're keeping their primary initial denials, let's say, as low as 6% or less. But the average, I just did some research recently on this. This year, like denials just keep increasing, increasing, and increasing every year, right? So the average in the country right now, I've seen percentages as high as 12%. It's tough.
So you being responsible for this, um, how you're measured and how effective you are can be determined by denials. So you have to be tuned into how your organization is properly accounting for the work that you're doing, and how you are interacting with, as you mentioned, not only several different categories, but in any category, a bunch of different organizations. So just in the major insurance provider category, you have shades of gray between the way that they handle different things. So you have to be involved in that. It's not just someone owes us $30. How can we get this more quickly? Part of that is actually going through the process of having someone say, actually, you know what, Christine, we don't owe you any money at all. And then you saying, well, no, I think you do. Let me
Mhm.
tell you why. Um, so that's not just sales or that's not like what a typical CRO has to worry about. They've got other people to worry about that stuff, but that is something that directly affects how effective you are.
Absolutely. And that is where I would say having really clean, accurate data at your disposal is extremely important. Okay. And this data comes from, and I should have mentioned this earlier, like the entire cycle is anchored to your electronic health record. So your
Okay.
EHR.
Yep.
And most people are familiar with Epic. If you have a MyChart account, then you've seen a provider that is on the Epic EHR platform, but there are other EHR platforms out there as well. But your source of truth is that EHR. Okay. So your ability to pull the data out of that EHR and structure it in a way that you can mine for these types of opportunities or vulnerabilities within your system is extremely important. Okay. Your ability to, I'd say, categorize the types of denials. Like if we want to hover there for a minute, because
Sure.
there are multiple denial categories. Some denial categories will run a higher risk of a future write-off than others. Some are more, they're just a drag on resources, right? If you get an additional documentation request from a payer, that's a drag on a resource. So that means there are more steps we're going to have to follow on the back end of the revenue cycle process, but we're going to get the payer that additional documentation. And then, assuming they don't find a reason to deny otherwise, they're going to pay the claim. But if you get a prior authorization denial, meaning you either failed to procure the authorization prior to the service, or you procured the authorization for a certain CPT code, but then when the service was actually provided, a different code was billed out, or there are myriad of reasons why you could get a prior auth denial. And a lot of times those denials are upheld and are going to result in a write-off if you don't get it perfect on the front end. Or medical necessity denials. Those are really complex, and sometimes it requires peer-to-peer, physician to physician on the provider side and the payer side to really wrestle with, did this particular service or test meet medical necessity requirements under that particular patient's benefits? So you really have to understand the data. You need to have access to clean, actionable intelligence. You need to have individuals in place who are really good at interpreting that type of intelligence. And then you need to organize your teams within revenue cycle and with tight connectivity to the clinicians. So your managed care team, those are the individuals who negotiate the contracts with our payers. You have the clinicians who are the ones documenting the care, or submitting orders for services, et cetera. You need a lot of connectivity between these other stakeholder groups, and a lot of cross-team collaboration to prevent these denials in the first place.
So are denials, that whole world you just described, would you say that's the sort of squeakiest wheel in the system? Is it the thing that that presents the most potential for improvement?
Yeah, I'd probably say it's the bane of my existence.
Okay.
And if you asked any revenue leader in the healthcare space, they'd probably tell you the same thing. It can sometimes feel like a game of whack-a-mole, because just as you build out a system or a remediation plan that would prevent a particular denial category, the payers are going to come up with another way to deny you. And so it's constantly shifting. It's a very hard metric to move. Um, but it is movable at the same time, right? It just requires an enormous amount of focus and energy. Um, and, we've, within this industry, we often say it's like the battle of the bots, because you have payers who, for the most part, have adopted automation techniques at a much faster clip than most providers or health systems have, right? And so without any human intervention at all, they can deny thousands of claims automatically. And they come at you like a tidal wave within a business office. And then you're, often caught trying to figure out, okay, I don't have the staffing for this. All right, let's look at our EHR. Are there any ways to impact the build of our EHR so we can automate certain steps? Or the rules might change. I talked about additional documentation requests earlier. Well, those rules change all the time, and they're not even easy to find at the payer level. So sometimes you have to wait until you experience a pattern with an ADR or some additional documentation request or whatever that might be. You wait till you experience the pattern, and then you try to build your own automation to address that new pattern. So it's good stuff.
Okay, okay. I think you've done a really good job of setting the table for the conversation. I'm sure we could spend a lot more time going through all of that in detail, but let's take what you just laid out for us as an example. You mentioned the electronic healthcare records company, and so that is your source of truth. The folks that build those systems, and I was thinking in my mind, our youngest child was born in 2007. And I remember that I was shocked in 2007 to have the anesthesiologist ask me, "Do you remember what we gave your wife the last time she was here?" And I'm like, "What? What do you, do I remember?" No. Well, okay, because it could take an hour for us to go down and retrieve the file. And I'm sitting there like, are you kidding me? Well, we weren't there yet. Now, okay, lots of advances. Everything is supposed to be electronic. I mean, there were some deadlines along the way, if I remember correctly. And so great. So now you've got the provider that's providing you this source of truth. They are well aware of this revolution in AI, and I'm sure that they're coming up with a variety of ways to increase the value of automations that they can provide, and then do novel things with various kinds of AI. And I know that you, Christine, have actually studied this whole the whole idea of transformation and how to leverage technology to transform an organization. So you've got your EHR company that's doing stuff kind of in its own walled garden. And then you've got the noise of the rest of the world coming at you, I imagine, with all sorts of different horizontal and vertical solutions that at some point have to integrate with your electronic health record system because that's the source of truth. So what's the sort of state of the state of all of that right now? Are you leaning in the direction of, wait for the source of truth to figure out their own version of it? Or are you seeking out those sort of, call them third parties that might have a horizontal or a vertical solution? What does that look like in your world right now? Just a temperature check.
Yeah, it's both and. So I'd say the first question, like when you identify the problem. So the first step is identifying the problem you need to solve. And typically it's at a workflow level most of the time. So the first question you want to ask is the automation already available to us through our EHR? And I'm familiar with Epic, so maybe I'll just say Epic, but it really could be applicable to any electronic health record. So the first question is this automation already available? And we just need to build it, right? Turn it on, build it within our instance of Epic. And if the answer is no, not yet, or it will be, maybe that's the first question. It will be soon because there is an Epic AI roadmap. So you want to look at the roadmap to see, well, is it coming in the next 6 months? Is it coming in a year? Can we wait that long? Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. It depends on your priority. So if it's not available to you today within your core platform, but will be soon, then you have a decision to make. Do I wait? Do we build a bridge strategy until it's live? But you really want to keep as much of your automation within that native Epic build as possible. It reduces the chance of something breaking and constant upkeep or risk of definitely having a tool outside of Epic would be less than ideal. But if it's not available within Epic or whatever your EHR is and won't be in the near future, and you're in a position where you need to automate, right? Like you're having a hard time keeping up with the volume of whatever it might be, and you don't have the staffing for it, you have to adopt something, then you start looking at third-party vendors, and there are many of them out there. Some are more advanced in their tech than others. But the first question is always going to be, are you integrated into Epic? And if you're not, and there's no plan to be, it's typically going to be a hard no, right? Because to have a workflow outside of your core platform, typically, I wouldn't say it's never a viable option, but typically it's not going to be a viable option. Right.
But
All
but
kinds of those points.
so would it be fair to say in general terms that
Mhm.
if I'm hearing you correctly, um, I have a brilliant idea for solving your problem, Christine's problem. I can solve it. My path to market is a design in win in the Epic ecosystem, in this case, as opposed to trying to do an end run and convince you where you might absolutely go through the checklist of 10 things and say, yep, you've nailed it all. However, the overriding concern that is, if you're not integrated into Epic, we're going to have issues down the road potentially, and I can't have that. It doesn't matter how good the solution is, you would counsel someone in this space, ecosystem is where it's at in terms of success.
It really is. I mean, it's always possible there could be a one-off that would be worth consideration, but that is going to be a rarity
Okay.
if it exists at all,
Okay, so
right?
now we're assuming, now
Mhm.
we're assuming that there are competitive offerings that all have,
Mhm.
that are all in the Epic ecosystem, and in fact, you might go to Epic and say, "Hey, can you do this?" Well, no, it's not really on our roadmap, but we actually have 3 partners that had these plugins, and they do that really, really well. They're certified. Then now you're
Mhm.
picking among them. Now you're evaluating them. So you've eliminated the concern about compatibility in your system, which is critically important everywhere, but in healthcare even more so,
Mhm.
we could argue. Uh, Now what? What are some things that these folks might do that would, I like the disaster stories. What might they do that would completely undermine your confidence in their ability to deliver?
Ooh-wee. Okay, I could give you a list there. I've had a few experiences, but I think I would start with, like, the price of entry
Okay.
is from a cybersecurity perspective, you have to be able to check all the boxes. That's a really big deal in the healthcare space. So there's cybersecurity concerns, um, what protocols they have in place to preserve and protect protected health information, or PHI, which is extremely important. Um, it's a non-negotiable within the healthcare space. And then a recognition that all healthcare providers have to adhere to an ever changing list of regulatory requirements at both the federal and state levels. They could vary from state to state. So, can their tech adapt easily to potential down the road changes in regulatory requirements? So, I'd say those are 3 biggies. There could be some more. But if you have a solid AI governance process in place, you're vetting each vendor with
Okay.
those 3 broad criteria right out of the gate. And of course, the integration into your core platform.
Well, who's doing that vetting in your organization? Is that just
Mhm.
would that just be you, or are there other
Oh, no, no, no.
stakeholders?
Oh, no. It's a multidisciplinary stakeholder group, which includes like our technology team, our privacy team, legal, um, regulatory compliance, revenue cycle, right? There's a large multidisciplinary group of stakeholders who are kind of charged at evaluating vendors and their contracts with very specific predetermined sets of criteria.
So that solution provider can't just come in and convince you that it's cool and then ignore all of the other folks that are your collaborators and peers. They have to build a certain consensus, and if they don't do
Mhm.
that, um, what happens at Christmas time for their children?
Yeah,
No presents
so
under the tree.
no presents this year. So, and I will tell you what's interesting is there was a vendor who shall remain nameless, that we were evaluating for tech that was really attractive to us. This was close to a year ago, and was primed to solve a very real problem. Okay. And there were very few in the market that had this type of technology. It's very complex. They were certified in Epic, so we were able to check those boxes. But when it came down to evaluating the cybersecurity, the PHI, and really what there's also the commercialization of data as well. So when you're in the healthcare space, like you got to be really careful. How are you going to use this PHI or de-identified PHI, and are you going to leverage it to train models for other clients, or can you preserve it just for us, et cetera? So we were working through that decision tree with this vendor. Well, this vendor was very motivated to close a deal at the end of their quarter. And
Right.
so instead of just leaning into the process and earning our trust and providing all the validations that were required of our AI governance council, which were all very appropriate, right? Because they have a responsibility to our organization to protect our data. Instead of doing that, they got very anxious, and then everyone was getting text messages, emails, phone calls on the weekend, late at night, like we really need a decision by, let's just say, Monday. Right? We're like, we're not going to give you a decision by Monday, and you just eroded our trust, right? Like you're trying to shortcut the things that matter most to us, and now we're thinking we may not be able to trust you as a partner, and we moved on. Now it is
I'm curious.
possible.
Well, Christine, I'm curious. Would you say that this vendor, um, did they not have kind of the domain expertise to understand how things worked in your world? Were they delivering something where maybe the people you're dealing with are dealing with 10 different kinds of industries and healthcare is only a small slice?
Mm,
Is that the case? Would you know?
I'm not sure. I don't know that I can answer that one, but it's possible. I will tell you what's interesting is they came up with really complex tech to solve a very specific problem, and they were maybe one of the first to market. Everyone has their own pressures, and so I think their inability to say, "Okay, wait a minute. These things are very, very important to this potential client. We need to respect these things that are very important to them and work through the process." And just working through that due diligence process itself is kind of a, "Hey, are we a good partner or are we not a good partner?" test, and
Right,
can they trust us? And so
right.
they kind of eroded our trust by pushing so hard. And then nobody won in that scenario, right?
Yeah, how
So
how responsive and collaborative are they going to be after they've already gotten the deal?
mhm,
Versus, look, they should be on their best behavior here, uh,
exactly.
which,
Yeah.
well, so when we talk about doing things like automating processes, and I'm really interested in this idea of like, um, my words, mass automated denial. Uh, it's almost like the classic, we're going to bury them in boxes of documents and demands for discovery to slow the process down because, interestingly enough, the resources that you can bring to bear to help patients ultimately depend upon how quickly you can realize revenue. Well, on the other side of it, if the insurance company can delay you by 10 days, there's a cell in a spreadsheet somewhere that is a positive $97 million or something crazy like that. They have a huge perverse incentive for delay, delay, delay. Does that mean that a big use for automation is sort of confronting that in an automated way? I've had silly back and forths with colleagues of mine where we intentionally have essentially our chatbots talk to each other, and it becomes completely ridiculous. The polite, ridiculous language, and nothing's getting done. I mean, is that a system that you have to worry about, having sort of automated replies to the automated replies? And have you seen anything that's effective to automate those things? What's getting you excited about these tools?
Hmm. Yeah. So it's kind of like that. Like let's maybe hover on the additional documentation requests, because those at this moment in time really are the bane of my existence. So ultimately we get a denial, or they call it a rejection, because they want additional documentation. And then I ask, okay, well, if we understand what the rules are and for this particular payer, and we know that every time we experience this, say, diagnosis, CPT code combination or whatever that might be, that they are always going to ask for, say, an itemized bill, a history and physical, a lab report, a diagnostic imaging report, op report, whatever it might be. Let's automate when we see these algorithms transpire. Let's automate preemptively the attachment of that documentation at the time of billing to prevent the denial in the first place. And that's harder than it sounds. Like, to me, that's a math equation. Like, this is easy peasy. We just run some analytics, we look for patterns, we build out an algorithm, and we're going to beat them at this game. However, not all payers will accept additional documentation at time of billing. They force you to wait till you get the denial and then you respond. So I'm like, okay, in those instances, then immediately when we receive the denial, then can we automate the submission of that additional documentation into their portal? And most payers have a portal that you submit the additional documentation through. And in some instances, maybe I'll even go as far as to say many instances, we can do that, right? Just with simple RPA technology. And we're looking at more advanced options as well. But there's one scenario where the payer portal requires you to pay a fee for you to use RPA to submit the additional documentation into their portal. So you have to request access, you have to engage in a contract with them so that you can deploy technology to submit the additional documentation into their portal. It's, to me, it's crazy.
Okay.
So, but you really have to understand the rules of engagement and honestly not get caught up in the crazy. You just understand these are the rules. Okay. So there are certain opportunities to prevent the denial, but in those instances, we're not able to prevent it. What are steps or automation steps we're putting into place so that we can automate the response to that denial? So that's one example, but there are 100 different use cases for automation in this space, from real-time eligibility checks to charge capture audits to autonomous coding. I focused a lot on the back end with either denial prevention or denial responses. But in addition to that, for the more complex denials where you require a submitted appeal letter, there's technology that exists today to help you automate writing, and not just a canned appeal letter, but a thoughtful appeal letter with substantiated evidence to submit to the payer when you are appealing a denial. So there are tons of use cases out there, and some of them are more complex than others.
Okay. Okay. So I didn't really understand this whole last line of reasoning. Could you send me some additional documentation that might help me understand the subject? That's a joke. That's a joke.
I
Uh,
know. And you know what, Dave? Because I am your literal friend who never gets your jokes for at least 10 seconds, but I got that real time.
Good
Progress.
job. Good job, Christine.
Thank you.
So yes, audience, Christine and I know each other from a certain Ivy League institution.
Mhm.
Um, and good times, good times. Well, okay, so if you had a birthday coming up and you had a birthday wish for something to be solved by AI,
Mhm.
you know, and I say AI in the grand umbrella term. It's
Mhm.
not necessarily generative AI, of course, but just something that could be automated, something that could be streamlined that would make a meaningful impact to these metrics that you use to track how effective you are. What would that be? What would that gift from the AI universe be?
Well, goodness, I hate to be boring here, but it would come down to denials. It would be automating processes on the front end to catch where maybe your workflow or your documentation is deviating away from a payer's rule book. And so you need an intervention to be able to notify you more real time. And then on the back end to automate the responses.
Okay. Okay. And so the idea would be, um, if you could ideally automate the first touch when a denial comes through, and
Mhm.
then only have to surface the ones that the automated system can't handle to a human in the loop, as we say.
Mhm.
That would be something that would be very, very helpful. And I imagine a lot of folks are working on that.
Mhm.
Um, Beyond denials, what would be the next thing that that's that's an issue that you would love to see improved?
When it comes to physician clinical documentation, because I watch the physician stakeholders that I partner with all the time. And, we're always engaging in these conversations where they may or may not be adequately capturing the severity of illness or complexity of care for the service they're providing, but they just want to provide care. And in many instances, they're providing really complex care to serve, to patients who are in need. And, um, we have these conversations around, yeah, but we got to scan the longitudinal record and make sure that we're capturing these chronic comorbid conditions. We're like, I don't have, when am I going to do that? Right. And so we call it pajama time, where physicians, in order for them to keep up with all this extraneous but necessary clinical documentation, they're doing it on their own time, a lot of times at night when
Okay.
they're done rounding on patients through the day. And that hurts my heart. So I'd say if there were, and I believe there are some use cases out there, some that are further along than others, um, that that would be ideal, and it would enable our physicians to spend more time at the bedside and to give them more personal, like rejuvenation time back. I would say the second, I am going to give you two, if that's okay.
Yeah.
There's another one, and I hate to get too technical with this, but I'm gonna just for a quick second. And um, and it relates to what we call DOFRs, DOFR, Division
Okay.
of Financial Responsibility, which
Okay.
is what exists in a delegated model, which is very prevalent in the state of California. It exists in some other states in to a lesser degree, but it's very prevalent in the state of California. And that's where you have major health plans contracting with large medical groups to create these HMO models. So you end up with this delegated model where the payer plan is contracted with the HMO and they contract with each other to determine who's ultimately going to be responsible for what types of services. And for the most part, they're wanting to capitate or to keep that care central to the medical group. But when a patient requires a complex service that the HMO or, the medical group is not able to provide, then the patient has an opportunity to go to a health system to have that care delivered, but there's no requirement on behalf of the plan or the HMO to communicate with the health system or to share with them their contracts. Okay. Meaning a patient comes to see us for an infusion. Say they're a cancer patient and they come to receive infusion services or radiation oncology or some type of complex care. And while they're there, they also have some diagnostic imaging and maybe some lab work and a few other things. Some of those services may be covered by the plan and some may be covered by the HMO, but we have no idea which. And so, in many instances, barring no other solution, health systems will build a plan first as a default and wait for a denial to come back because the plan says, yeah, but we're not responsible. And sometimes they'll deny the whole thing and they'll request you to split the claim and only bill them for certain things. And then you have to bill the HMO. And it can take a ridiculous amount of time with that back and forth, and it's really complex. Now, some health systems have done some deep dive analytics to try to piece together patterns with certain payer, plan, HMO combinations, and then they'll they'll build split claim logic based on those patterns that they're seeing. And, they have some limited success with that. And I think there might even be a couple other AI driven tools on the market, but that one is a biggie. Um, and I just
Interesting.
find the whole model a bit fascinating to navigate.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And the first one that you mentioned, just that sort of tip of the care spear where you have, say, your primary care provider is meeting with you and they have 11 minutes or 14 minutes or whatever it is. Um, I imagine that there are opportunities with tools, frankly, generative AI tools to a degree, where, note takers that will summarize interactions. I guess there's an element of garbage in, garbage out in the sense that if the caregiver isn't, the care provider is not adequately accounting for the work that's being done the way the system needs it accounted for, everything breaks down. And so the frustration on the part of the physician who's there to provide healthcare is that they're chasing codes. What's the code for this? What's the code for that? If there were a way for an intermediary, an automation intermediary to streamline that process, I'm sure doctors and patients would be a lot happier. And then maybe that would iron out some of the accuracy issues and at least help with part of it. But the last one you gave, pretty pretty complex. I think that this has been an amazing opportunity for anyone who's interested in peeking beneath the covers of how does revenue cycle work in these organizations, and what do people like Christine care about? What do they think about every day? What are they trying to achieve? So it's been very fascinating. What again? I mean, you gave me two solutions that you'd like to see. Um, as you kind of pay attention to the AI world in general, anything that maybe even outside of your world that's sort of shocking to you or not as good as you think it should be yet, just general thoughts on AI.
Well, honestly, I'm going to reflect back on something you said during one of our group sessions when we were participating with the Wharton School, if I'm allowed to say that.
Yeah, you are.
And you made a comment, and I even jotted it down in my notes, was that AI at some point was going to become something to akin like how we view electricity. And I had to sit with that for a minute. I'm like, huh, what does he really mean by that? Because that was going on close to 2 years ago. And so,
Oh heck, Christine, I was drunk when I said that. Little Ricky Bobby. When you're first, you're last. If you're not first, you're last. Little reference.
oh my gosh, you're so funny. So anyway, so I really I reflected on that a bit and I started paying attention. And so now, let's just say 2 years later, I am engaging with Copilot every single day, sometimes multiple times a day. I feel like I have a trusted advisor with my Copilot, right? And we're starting to create agents and we're getting to a point where we're experimenting. It's AI is a part of every conversation in some way, right? So I'd say that's what's rolling around in my mind right now. It's becoming a core part of just about every discussion and in the way we engage with our work. It's becoming akin to how we view electricity. It's just there. You almost don't even think about it. So I don't know. That was kind of an interesting takeaway for me, before, and I'm seeing that come to life now.
Well, I'm glad it's happening. I can't take 100% credit. I'm sure I wasn't the first person who thought of that analogy, but no, I think it is true. And Christine, it's been a delight. Thank you so much for spending time with us to talk about the revenue cycle. I mean, every time I say it, I'm gonna hedge. I'm gonna go, wait, is it revenue
You call
recognition?
it whatever you want, Dave.
But the idea that it's just not as simple as sending out a bill and waiting for someone to pay, and that there are, very, very real dollars and decisions that need to be made that have really important outcomes if you can improve automation and efficiency in this space. Um, Thanks for giving us that fantastic insight into your world. It's been a pleasure spending time with you. And for the rest of you, keep coming back to Reality Check. We'll have lots of these conversations in the future. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.